Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk. In this edition, ask yourself this: will a centralised Resource Management Act actually lower costs for farmers or force them to pay more from their own pockets? Higher fuel prices are just one more challenge for farmers despite high global commodity prices. Should farmers be lobbying for a drop in road user charges and tax on farm-delivered diesel? And the controversy surrounding beef cattle and the growth-promoting hormone HGP. It's banned in Europe, but what about here at home? Is it an animal welfare issue we need to resolve? Joining me today is Greg Glover, Chair of the Waikato Balance Farm Environment Awards, and Roger Wilson, Partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Mandy.
Hi, Mandy.
Greg, do we need a centralised RMA?
Well, I think first of all we have to agree that we need an RMA. The second point is that RMA supportive of business, and is it achieving the goals that it set out to, which is, I guess, protecting the environment and also supporting business. So the overall strategy needs to be, I guess, centralised, can look at what are the needs of the country from a business perspective, and then the environmental perspective that is required can be fed in from the regions for their own, I guess, their own special requirements for each region of our country. So if it is based around a sound strategy, farmers will buy into it, and I think it will make really good sense from a business perspective.
Roger, do you think at the moment it is based on sound strategy?
No, the issue we've got at the moment with the RMA is that every region has its own rules. And increasingly, as we get these agribusinesses that cover many regions, a property can go across a road and have two councils that it has to comply with. And so we've got the larger farming groups that New Zealand's gradually accumulating are having to deal with so many different rules, sometimes for the same property, but within the same group of properties. So some sort of overarching uniformity amongst those regulations is going to make business a lot easier for the agribusiness sector to operate.
Do you think we're going to end up, Greg, with less regulatory hoops for farmers to jump through?
My view is that we will have more focused hoops to jump through that actually achieve, rather than having lots and lots of different issues going on. We'll have a main focus for it. So yeah, the hoops that we'll have to jump over will be more relevant to the business that we're in.
We have to take responsibility for those hoops, though, because if we don't have self-regulation and take our own responsibility, central government, local government will impose those rules on us. And
by we you mean us farmers?
On us farmers, on the agribusiness. And those rules may not be as relevant as we would like them. So if we don't take responsibility for our position, care for the environment, be sensitive towards it, we will be inundated with rules that we think are ridiculous and onerous and quite constraining. So we do have to take responsibility for it and front up to them.
And I think as farmers we do care about the environment, but do we have a long view of the environment, or is it just on a year-to-year basis? There are some really special places in New Zealand that do need protecting, and it's beholden on the government, I guess, to help facilitate the protection of those things. For it to be self-regulated, I'm not sure that it would work all that well.
Greg, as a previous winner of Farm Environment Awards, what opportunity is there for farmers, as Roger suggested, to actually get involved and have some degree of farmer-led regulation as opposed to statutory led regulation?
To be honest, I think there's been probably 20 years for that opportunity, and now the common sense of what is known by everybody about how the last 20 years have worked, what has worked and what hasn't worked, the common sense part of that should be already been picked up, I would have thought, and that's why we're seeing some changes now. But yeah, to be farmer-led is probably a little bit too far forward. It needs to be a whole community approach, but learning from what has been in place for the last 20 years.
So I think it has to be farmer-led because we're getting an increasingly rural-urban divide. A lot of urban people don't understand what happens on farm. So farmers have to get out there and communicate with the community what happens on our property? How do we, how do we care for the environment? Because currently we get the headlines, we get the negative headlines, we don't get the good stories. So I think there has to be a big part of leadership from farmers to get out there and promote the good things that happen. I mean, in the Waikato recently, Bill Garland opened his farm up to, which backs on the Mangatautari Ecological Island Reserve. Now that sort of thing, inviting the people, the urban people onto the farm, see how the farm operates, and recognise what we are trying to do, rather than reading in the paper about duty dairying and about findings and all of these sorts of things.
So what you're really talking about there is not farmers being the policemen, but farmers helping to make the rules. Now, what I wanted just to talk about is a recent announcement from the Reserve Bank to drop the official cash rate to 2.5%, which was recently announced on Country 99 TV. What, Roger, impact is this going to have on farmers that already have a high level of indebtedness?
It's going to take some immediate cash flow pressure off if you're on a short-term floating or short-term fixed rate. If you're still on a longer-term fixed rate, that drop in the OCR has no immediate impact. It'll have an impact when those fixed agreements roll off. So that's a cash flow benefit. Now, the farmers who've got too much debt have still got to address the too much debt issue. It's just that you've possibly got a little more time to address your business and manage your cash flow through what is currently a pretty good climate. I mean, meat, milk and fibre are all at pretty record highs. So farming is quite cash flow positive, particularly the next sort of 6 months, because most farming businesses are front-end loaded with their costs. It's only about now that we start to come into cash surplus. We sell the final lambs, finish the final bulls and steers, and we start to come into the tail end of the milk dairy season, so our costs are much lower.
Roger, do you think there's an argument to call upon the government to reduce road user charges or perhaps even the tax on diesel that's delivered on farm?
Yeah, you could justify all sorts of arguments, but the reality is that you're talking about a subsidy. New Zealand farmers have left subsidies behind 25 years ago. It's a market force. It's not a factor that we can control. And so if you start to put those sort of subsidies in place, you start to distort the market. And perhaps, as Greg says, it becomes another focus around farm efficiency, around fuel efficiency. So I'm not a fan of subsidies. We're in a free market environment. Unfortunately, it's a cost we have to bear. It will push up our production costs, but it's something which is well beyond our control.
Talking about subsidies, the Strait Whare recently ran an article talking about a small group in Australia lobbying against the supermarket giant Coles, who are trying to impose a ban on beef being produced with the growth hormone HGP. What do you think about this, given that there's some really good scientific evidence to suggest that HGP, Greg, has an impact on animal welfare? And two, the argument for it is that it actually makes businesses more sustainable in a feedlot system in Australia.
I think we have to wear our New Zealand hat and decide whereabouts in the world we're going to be competing with our products. New Zealand, as a country, we produce enough food for around about 80 to 100 million people. So that's only half a dozen big cities in the world. And we will be able to, I'm sure, position our products and have them differentiated from the feedlot type farming systems, and be a grass-fed New Zealand grass-fed beef animal or lamb or whatever, or milk will have a place in the market and should be able to command a premium.
Roger, what do you think about the fact that the argument by this small group of Australian vets, and partially funded by the people that make HGP, is that without the use of the growth promotants, we won't be able to feed the world's population? Philosophically,
I totally agree that without some sort of genetic modification, we're not going to feed, the global population will not feed itself. The population is growing too rapidly, there's only so much arable land, and production capability is not keeping up with population growth. So society has to have this debate around genetic modification again, and will continue to have it for some time. Philosophically though, I kind of struggle with the concept of an animal that's in a paddock with muscles on muscles to provide meat for us, for the human to consume. Sure, I can cope with a stocking rate that doubles, subject to environmental considerations, but I can cope with that emotionally. But emotionally, seeing that muscled animal in the paddock, it just doesn't spin my wheels. So that doesn't remove the fact that we have to have that debate about genetic modification, growing more feed, more meat, more protein to feed the global population.
So we'll leave the muscles on muscles to our rugby boys, shall we? Thanks, guys. Coming up after the break, Synlay's CEO slams farmers down south, accusing them of degrading the quality of Canterbury water with poor practices. Is he right? And does our wool industry need to become a monopoly so we can remain competitive with China? Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk. John Penno, the CEO of Synlay, recently addressed a group of farmers in Ashburton and said that farmers were degrading the quality of water in Canterbury and needed to clean up their act. Tough talk. What do you think about this, Greg?
Well, it's an interesting comment, but I guess the thing we need to think about is, will we be able to farm as we are in 100 years' time? And if we apply that to it, I guess there are some, what he's highlighting is there are some things we need to learn. The water is degrading, there's no question about it, but the improvements that have been made in the last 10 or 20 years have been significant, and what we're now requiring is some more improvements over the next few years so that we can still continue to farm in 100 years' time. Yeah, so he is right, but we need to say, farmers need to ask themselves, will their practices be able to be used in 100 years' time, and we carry on.
Roger, what do you think about that? Are we doing enough?
No, I don't know that we are doing enough. As I said earlier, we've got this urban-rural divide. Water is one of the issues that we're not managing as well as we could do. There's a whole number of other issues that we have to take responsibility for and farm in a sustainable manner and communicate what we're doing so that we can keep the urban population on our side and appreciate and recognise what happens on the farm. They don't recognise what happens behind the farm gate. If people living in the city don't appreciate the farming practices and the needs and the reasons why some of those decisions are made. As I say, water is one issue. It's clearly not being managed as well as it could be, but it will be increasingly an issue in the next decade, if not longer, around water harvesting and water management. And I think we haven't touched the tip of the iceberg yet on water harvesting. But
it's important farmers get are given the knowledge on how to manage the water properly, how to manage the nutrient runoff.
And Greg, that exists now. I mean, you've only got to look at countries like Australia, Israel, parts of America where they've been having to use irrigated water for 100 years or so. So I think that knowledge is there.
It might be there, but if you have a look at Canterbury, for example, the serious irrigation systems have only just been put in over the last 20 years. And so from a New Zealand perspective, we are learning, and we are learning what those impacts are. And we're having to make some mistakes ourselves, but I think you're right. There is a lot of knowledge out in the world, and we need to start really seriously bringing that knowledge into New Zealand so that sustainable long-term farming systems can be put in place here.
We know that we've got the water. It's just that we're not managing it as properly. We're not harvesting it when it's available. We're rushing it out to sea as quickly as we can. So we know the water's there. We have to become much more efficient at managing it.
Talking about managing our resources, and before we get started on this next story, I need to declare an interest that my father is the chairman of Ravensdown Fertiliser. That has no impact on the story that we're going to discuss. Ravensdown Fertiliser Co-op has just had a win in the courts, in the High Court, with their IP over EcoN. What impact do you think that this is going to have on our use of nitrogen inhibitors?
I think for what am I trying to say? That for the uptake, for farmers to use nitrogen inhibitors, they need to have faith in the science around those inhibitors. They appear to work quite well around the Canterbury region, and don't appear to work as well in the Waikato. It's warmer, doesn't get as cold in the wintertime, seem to work well in the colder temperatures of the winter in the South Island. So what farmers are looking for, and what will be the biggest breakthrough, is their faith in the science of what Ravensdown are selling. Yeah.
Roger, do you think the fact that they've actually won this court case will give farmers more faith in the science?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my understanding of the court cases are primarily around the application system. The importance of the patent is that it protects the technology as a New Zealand Inc. asset. And I think increasingly as we intensify, we need to make sure that we maintain the intellectual property as New Zealand assets so that we can have those assets for the benefit of NZ Inc. rather than having those assets, that intellectual property, used offshore unnecessarily.
One of the things that they have said, though, that Ravensdown, that is, after the win, is that it allows them to licence this patent offshore in Australia, America, etc. So is that at odds with what you just said about protecting our IP?
No, it's protecting our IP for the benefit of New Zealand. If you look at the kiwi fruit industry, it had to develop zestberry gold as a response to it losing control of some of its vines. And this is no different. We want to protect their intellectual property so that we can, if we can license that offshore, we can bring some rewards back for that intellectual property, that investment and development back to for NZ Inc. so that we can continue to invest and remain leaders in agribusiness. So I don't think it's at odds. I think it's totally in alignment.
What
about for shareholders of Ravensdown? Is it a win for them?
Well, it certainly gives Ravensdown more confidence to invest in that technology. You know, it protects that. They can start pouring some money in, and the shareholders will get the benefit from increased market share and increased sales, etc.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving on, there's a fear that Cavalier Wool Holdings, if they take over Wool Scours International, that it'll create a monopoly in New Zealand. Is this really a big issue? Roger, I'm going to ask you this question first. Or do we need to have more of a monopoly to become competitive with the likes of China in wool scouring?
I think if you look at New Zealand, we're a small country. Fonterra is the only global business we've got. When we look at our other meat, milk and fibre producers, we're too small to influence. Individually, we're too small to influence. We need to, if we want to be a global country and supply globally, we have to have some scale so that we can have an influence on the end market. Is a monopoly a bad thing? Only if it's abused. I don't know where this will end up, but it's about creating some scale so that we can go out to the global customers and influence the price and the value of what we're producing.
It's also about providing a platform for innovation as well. Yep. You know, wool is a fantastic product. New Zealand produces a lot of it, and for the last 20 years, it hasn't been performing very well. We need some, and there are some examples out there of some fantastic uses of wool that have all of a sudden become fashionable, and there's various fashion items that have been used. There is a lot of potential, but we're not leveraging it properly yet.
Wool's the perfect renewable resource.
Absolutely.
You know, it's renewable, it's annually grown, it's green, environmentally friendly. So it's the perfect resource like that. It just hasn't had the investment over the past 20, 30 years, and maybe longer. I don't think I'm that old, don't stand beyond them. But yeah, but it hasn't had the investment in a structured and coordinated approach to really unlock the true value.
And the price of fuel, that is going to create a massive opportunity. You know, synthetic carpets, synthetic clothing, synthetic everything requires oil. And wool can replace, well, synthetics replace wool. Wool can now replace synthetics.
I guess the issue at the moment is that we're sending our wool offshore to have it scoured and sent back or made into garments. And I mean, I met Tony when I was in China a couple of years ago with my upward scholarship, and I was really impressed by his willingness to involve and grow the Australian and New Zealand wool market, to also grow his own business. And so if he's got the technology there and the capability, do we have to be the best at everything?
We've got to be aspirational. I mean, I don't know if I don't know Tony at all, anything about his business, but we've got the raw material. We produce wool, we produce it in an environmentally sustainable way. There will be an increasing demand for it. Why can't we aspire to be the best at it? And we cannot complete the end processing as cheaply as the likes of China can, but we can still add value and have some involvement in that, much like we're talking about maintaining intellectual property for the benefit of NZ Inc., as opposed to packaging it up in bales and shipping it over there unscoured. So, yeah.
I certainly know that Tony was had long-term plans to shift his process offshore to Egypt because of escalating labour costs in China. But anyway, okay, coming up after the break, we ask Roger and Greg if they have a rant or a rave. What will it be? See you after the break. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Time now for what's pushing our buttons. Will it be a rant? Or rave? Greg, you've got a grin on your face. What have you got for us?
Well, look, one of the things that worries me about the sustainability of particularly the dairy industry at a farm level is the individual farm businesses that operate in that space. And I guess I'm talking about the governance of those businesses and their right to be in business. So I guess do they hold a board meeting, even if it is a sort of a casual board meeting, but do they ask themselves, are they compliant? Do they deserve to be in business? Do they ask themselves, do they have a strategy? Do they understand where they're going with their business? Do they put a financial measurement across their business to make sure that they're financially viable? And I guess, do they ask themselves, do they have the right people involved with their business to help them achieve the goals that they're in? So the compliance issues cover everything from OSH to environmental to tax to paying wages on time. The strategy is about where do they want to go over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and are they putting the right things in place to actually help them achieve that? And the financial ones, they're obvious. Are they making a profit each year? And I guess the leadership is, have they got smarter people around them to help them achieve their goals? That's so that's the sort of thing.
So essentially, is farming an inalienable right for anybody? With, summing it up really closely. Roger.
My issue is actually around on-farm production. We've currently bred dairy cows that are able to produce a lot of milk. We've got ewe flocks that are having high lambing percentages. And I don't believe we're growing enough grass to feed those animals. So genetically, we've moved the animal flock ahead, but I don't know that the seed and soil scientists have kept up with those guys to meet that demand from a grazed pasture. We're having to import too much supplement on farm to maintain the welfare of those animals and have untapped potential on the outputs from those animals. So I'd really like to see the seed and soil scientists to really catch up with the livestock genetics guys so that farmers can feed their animals properly and achieve their production potential that is currently untapped. On those cows, a lot of cows in New Zealand are running around underfed because we don't have enough supplement or enough grass grown on farm that's grazable.
Boy, these guys are good. You keep stealing my thunder. Have you got any raves?
I thought that
What's
was
good?
it.
I thought that,
What's right? Hey, look, the meat, milk and fibre, the prices are great. We're in a little bit of a purple patch now, which is taking some cash flow pressure off. Farmers are able to get their balance sheets a little bit stronger. So I think that the current situation at the moment is quite comfortable, but let's not lose sight of the basics. We have to manage risk. And I don't think land values are going to go again in a hurry. Banks have got a very high bar for any transactions. So we just need to accept that and look after our own business at the moment. I think we're in quite a purple patch.
Thanks, guys. A pleasure as always. That's it for this edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Burrow. I'd like to thank again my guests, Roger Wilson from PricewaterhouseCoopers and Greg Glover, Chair of Waikato Balance Farm Environment Awards. And of course, I'd like to thank you for watching. For more information, check out my blog on country99tv.co.nz. I look forward to hearing from you, and in the meantime, keep on talking straight. See you next time.